All right, Bryan. 2025, and it's still weird to say that 2025 is here. I'm still kind of in that weird window where I'm still writing 24 on a lot of the things that I'm writing down, a lot of the
Checks.
notes that I'm writing down.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
I had to
it's
write a
weird.
check today, 2 checks today, one to our HOA and then another one to somebody else. But it's like, I'm like, oh crap, I wrote 2024 again. Gets me
Yeah.
every year, man. And yes,
Yep.
I'm old, so I still write some checks.
Well, I save all of our notes from the show and in Google Docs, and I was trying to find some of the ones from like that we did earlier last week, and I was like, where are all of these? And it's because I labeled them all like 1, 20, 24. So that makes sense. But believe it or not, we're already in 2025, and Notre Dame does play football again this year. A couple months to wait. Say that a little hyperbolically, but they play football again in 2025. And there's some expectations that this team does have based on what they did do in 2024 and who they have coming back, like we just highlighted. So, what are some of those, right? We're going to talk through what the expectations are and reasons why we're optimistic, and then some big question marks that we do have, right? Because this team is far from being complete. They don't have a GM or a director of recruiting or a defensive coordinator yet in 2025. So, there's a lot of questions that we do have. But starting with what the expectations will be for 2025. Bryan, where do you start and where do you kind of look at?
I think when we're having this conversation, Trevor, there's setting a range of expectations. And we talked about this before the 2024 season. There's the floor of what's acceptable to say that you're still moving the needle, trending in the right direction. And then there's the ceiling of what I think a team can be. The ceiling conversation is not so much my focus today because there's still so much we don't know about this team. How can I tell you what the ceiling is with this team when I don't know who the starting quarterback is going to be? How can I tell you what the ceiling of this football team is going to be when I don't know for sure who the defensive coordinator is going to be? I don't know for sure what the coaching staff is going to look like. I know there's some other things that are still in the work. Who's going to replace Chad Bowden? Although I don't know that is going to have as much of an impact on the 25 team as it will future teams. But all those things are still kind of up in the air to truly dive into the ceiling of this team. So what the focus will be today is what is the floor of this team and what needs to happen for this team to reach the ceiling, which is or the not the ceiling of what the team will be, but what the standard is, ultimate standard is for Notre Dame, which is still winning a championship. I mean, that's still the ultimate standard. As I've said before, Trev, and I'm curious, I don't know if you've ever had a chance to talk about this. This is something we talked about on the show before. But I think there's got to be two ways you evaluate a Notre Dame football team. One is the ultimate standard. Did you win a title or not? And if you didn't, then you fell short of the ultimate standard, and it's okay to say that. But that doesn't mean the season is then also a failure. There's people say, well, if you don't win a title, it's a season failure. I think that's also nonsense. I can look at this season and say it fell short of the ultimate standard of Notre Dame. I don't even think this team maximized its potential because its potential should have been 15-1 and losing to Ohio State in the championship game because you shouldn't have lost Northern Illinois, right? That's fair. But you can still look at that and say, sure, they could have been better, maybe should have been a tad better here or there, and still say this was a heck of a season for Notre Dame. A heck of a season. And the needle moved like big time for the program and what they've been and what they were this year. And so that's still the ultimate standard. And we'll talk about some of the questions that we have about getting to that level. But my reasons for optimism are more about what I think the floor will be, Trev. And for me, the floor for me for this season, worst case scenario, where I'll accept, okay, they're still trending in a good direction of program, is 10-2 with no bad losses, and you're in the college football playoff again. Now, what I mean by bad losses is A, you lose to a team you have no business losing to. Navy. With all due respect to Boise State. That type of game where you're just like Purdue at home, Syracuse at home on senior day, Stanford. There's just some losses that are just unacceptable. The other bad loss is you got your butt kicked loss. Now, what's interesting is for all the talk about Marcus Freeman having bad losses, and he does, Marshall was a bad loss. Stanford was a bad loss. I would argue that Stanford was the worst loss of his tenure because it was a bad team. Northern Illinois and Marshall were bad losses, but they were still good football teams. Marshall won 10 games in 2022, and Northern Illinois was a 9-win team that won a bowl game. And they were only a 9-win team because their stud running back got banged up for like half the year. You know, I mean, Antonio Brown was never fully healthy after the Notre Dame game. But those are bad losses still because they're not good teams. Stanford was not a bad team. Like, that was the worst team you lost to. The only time that, but what we have not seen is that loss where they just get their butts kicked. Ohio State 2022 was not a butt kicking. They were in that game late. You know, you're down 14-10. You make one stop. You get the ball back. You had to lead late in the third quarter. You had to lead at halftime. You lost by 11. You lost by 11 to USC, but you've got the ball in the fourth quarter with 5 minutes left with a chance to go down and tie it. That's not a butt kicking. They were the better team than you, but that was not a butt kicking. That was not a bad loss. You got beat in a competitive game by a better football team. That was true of that game. That was true of the Ohio State game in 2022. 2023, Ohio State was a bad loss based on how you played, but it wasn't a bad loss from the standpoint of you lost to a really good football team in a close game. The bad loss was the part of it was, how do you lose it with 10 guys in the field? That's unacceptable. You know, you look at the Clemson game last year, that was close to being a bad loss because you were better than them, but that's still a 9-win football team on the road in a game where you lost by 8. I would say that Northern Illinois, bad loss, 2-point loss, Ohio State, 11 point. There hasn't been that 41-8 Miami 2017. There hasn't been that 39-20, 38-20 Stanford 2015. There hasn't been that 45-14 to Michigan from 2019. They haven't had that kind of bad loss. The closest they came was Louisville last year because it was 30-13 and you scored late. No, it was 33-13. You scored late to make it 33-20. So I think that was a bad loss from a you got your butts absolutely kicked standpoint. That's the only team, in my opinion, that's just flat kicked Notre Dame's butts for 60 minutes was Louisville last year. That was the anomaly. So the other part of it is avoid that type of loss. You do that and go 10-2, and I'm like, look, yeah, you know, like to have won that. We can talk about what went wrong or what they got to get better at. But to me, that's the floor. That's the floor of what I view this team to be. The expectations where, and when you're winning, you're still winning impressively. And that's something that Marcus Freeman's teams have done the last 2 years. In the last 2 seasons, Trevor, Notre Dame has won 24 football games, which is a really impressive deal, right? If you look at it, what makes it even more impressive is, I'm just going back through this. You said 1, 2, 3. Of their 24 wins, 21 of them have been by double digits. You didn't beat Duke last year by more than double digits. You didn't beat Louisville this year by double digits, but you had a double-digit lead in the fourth quarter. And you didn't beat Penn State in the national semifinals by double digits. But you beat Georgia by double digits in the Sugar Bowl. You beat Indiana by double digits in the first-round playoff game. And then the rest of your games, you won by at least 10, a lot of times more. And so, to me, I look at this and I look at this football team and I say, keep dominating and go minimum 10-2 with no bad losses. That's kind of how I look at no really bad losses. That's how I look at the floor for 2025. That's the minimum floor. And then next we'll talk about, you know, what could happen for them to achieve that. But I think anything worse than 10-2 next year is a bad performance or disappointing performance.
You know, one thing that I think is interesting about Marcus Freeman is the worst margin of loss that he's had is 13 points. And it was that Louisville game, which is really weird to think about, right? Because, I mean, it's some of that BK PTSD, but you think of 2019 Michigan, 2017 Miami, you think of the 2012 National Championship, you think of 2018 playoffs, the 2020 ACC Championship, the 2020 playoffs, and that's just what Marcus Freeman has shown. Like, that's why when people were releasing what their predictions were for the national championship game, I was like, listen, I'm not saying that Notre Dame's going to win. I did predict that, but in combating what some Ohio State fans believe to be the final score of seeing the 38 to 10s
Right.
and seeing that, it's like, hey, listen, Marcus Freeman hasn't lost like that in his time at Notre Dame. And that's not specific to Ohio State. Like, that's specific to him and his program. Right. But for me, when you start talking about expectations, mine is at a minimum floor. I'm with you there, Brian. 10-2. I would go as far as saying is winning a first round playoff game, because I think you could loop that in with minimum expectations for this football team. Most likely they're going to end up hosting again. And I don't think that they have to reach their full potential to be.
Do you think they do it 10-2? That's what I'm saying. For floor, 10-2 is the floor. I don't know that they're hosting at 10-2. That would be my thing.
The thing that's so tough is, like, I don't know, because I think some of that depends on just what the rest of college football does, which I think is tough. But for me, with how this season went, for me to walk away and say, like, okay, this team is still trending in the right direction. It's making the playoffs and winning a first round game, because because you don't want to have that, the years where Ohio State like made the playoffs, but then got bounced in the first round. Yeah. I don't think that there's a whole lot of redemption in that story, going from making the national championship game and losing in the fashion that you did to getting bounced in the first round. So that's why for me, I say the floor is a first round playoff win. And obviously it gets a little steeper if they have to travel somewhere to a higher seed, but I would like to think that they would be hosting at 10-2, but I just, again, I have no idea, because I got to go and dive a little bit more into what other teams have coming back and what the outlook on their season looks like. But yeah, that would be my floor, along with the no bad losses.
So we set our floors. Now let me tell you what kind of my way too early expectation is. Not ceiling, but early expectation for the regular season primarily. I think that to me, for this football team to be what I think it is, and really feel like they are definitely arrived as a powerhouse, I think it's got to be 11-1. I think it's doable. I think when I look at that schedule, I say there's 3 teams on your schedule that are on your level as a roster. It's Miami, Texas A&M, and USC. And when I mean on your level, use that very loosely, meaning like you may have the better – I think Notre Dame has a better overall roster than every team on their schedule. I felt that about this year's team in the regular season. I said that preseason. But we also said A&M, USC, and Florida State are the 3 teams that are on your level to the point where they can take advantage of you not playing your A game. Now, of course, Florida State ended up being pretty terrible. But those other 2 teams, there's no